Australia has committed $6 billion over the next 5 years to climate adaptation spending. That comes as two government reports warn of more frequent, severe and overlapping hazards caused by global warming. Let's bring in Bloomberg NEF Head of Australia Research, Leonard Kwong. Lenny, so will this funding be enough, or does more need to be done in order to manage Australia's climate risks?
So it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The recommendations for this adaptation spending have come on the back of the release of the National Climate Risk Assessment, which is Australia's first deep dive into the impacts posed across the economy and its population from a warming climate. And the results of this analysis were pretty remarkable. In some areas of the country, the threat of deaths caused by extreme heat could rise by over 400%. Some prime agricultural land is under threat of near total collapse, and the potential damage bill to infrastructure and property, particularly in coastal or more rural communities, could run into the hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, the National Adaptation Plan is the government's strategy for where investment could be best placed to manage some of the vulnerabilities to the economy and to the population in the years to come. But what's been highlighted by the government in these reports and other commentary is the amount of adaptation spending required is ultimately determined by the amount of warming Australia and the world faces. In a scenario where climate change is 3 or even 4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the potential risks and therefore adaptation costs would be far, far higher than a scenario where the world manages to constrain global warming to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And unfortunately, the trajectory we're on right now is a bit of an unanswered question.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what sort of emissions target is Australia expected to adopt? The risks are there, but are we actually going to be really addressing those fully?
So right now, no one really knows exactly what targets Australia is likely to adopt, hopefully within the next couple of days. Ministers have done a wonderful job keeping this particular secret under wraps, but there are a few things that we do know. Right now, Australia is committed through legislation and its existing NDC to achieving a 43% reduction on 2005 level greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, so just in 5 years' time. And recently, in a report, the independent body, Climate Change Authority, has recommended that the government consider a target between 65 to 75% below 2005 levels by 2035. Now, a lot has been said about that recommendation. Those in Australia who would like to see greater aspirations for deep decarbonisation have been lobbying the government to consider a target on the higher end of this range, and will be spurred on by the recent release of the Climate Risk Assessment. Those, and some in the business community, more concerned about the potential costs and disruptions from an energy transition, have been suggesting that the government consider a target on the lower end of that range, or even below 65%. Now, the climate impact is an interesting question to delve into, and something we looked at in our long-term energy market analysis, our new energy outlook last year. And in that, we considered a scenario we termed the net zero scenario, where the world rallied around deep decarbonisation and managed to stay on a pathway of about 1.75, so well below 2 degrees of warming. And in that analysis, we found that Australia's energy-related emissions would need to fall by about 70% on 2005 levels by 2035 to remain on the correct trajectory. So from that, we can see that if the Australian government does commit to a target at around 70% or perhaps even above, it's a signal that they remain resolute in their commitments to deep decarbonisation. If, however, they're weighed down by concerns about international geopolitics around decarbonisation, they may opt for a lower target as well.
Great insights. That was Bloomberg NEF Head of Australia Research, Leonard Kwong there. And let's get more on this now with our next guest. Joining us is Amanda McKenzie. She's CEO of Australia's Climate Council. And Amanda, I mean, we just heard sort of Lenny laying it out there for us. We really don't know the target that the Albanese government is going to set. But what's your expectation of the number that we receive?
Well, Lenny mentioned that range of 65 to 75%, which the Climate Authority had put out in 2024 in May as the range that they were considering and may form a recommendation. So we expect that the Climate Authority may have already made that recommendation to the government and that the government is considering it. But the important thing, as Lenny mentioned in terms of the risk assessment, is that the risks for Australia are incredibly severe, and the trajectory to slash our climate pollution now needs to be very steep. So we have done our own scientific analysis, which replicates the scientific analysis of other bodies, that shows we need to bring net zero forward forward to 2035, so 15 years earlier than what is currently slated.
And I mean, yes, you've got that need maybe to bring it to 2035, but do you think that that need is also appreciated by the government and also everyday Australians?
Well, it was really interesting in the last few weeks seeing a group of businesses led by Fortescue Metals and the Future Group, Unilever, a range of other businesses all coming out and calling for 75% plus. They also released some modelling by Deloitte, which showed that a higher target, 75 versus 65, would reap additional benefits to the Australian economy, flipping the sort of standard economics on it, maths on its head, because the idea is that if Australia does have a strong signal to the global market, which is competitive around clean energy, clean green metals, that would attract far more investment into the Australian economy. So there has been a significant number of businesses, now over 500, that are advocating for strong targets from the Australian government.
So what are the biggest opportunities, do you think, for Australia to become a clean energy powerhouse? And given that other major economies are also racing ahead with renewables, what are the risks of Australia lagging behind?
Absolutely. Well, Australia is the sunniest country in the world. We're one of the windiest. We have huge resources in lithium, as well as a range of other critical minerals that go into building parts of our clean energy infrastructure. So Australia is very well set up to benefit, to become a clean energy superpower. But as you said, there is a global competition for capital as many countries are moving forward rapidly in renewable power. So it is important that Australia has a very clear market signal, which comes from our target. There are also many other opportunities in exports, for instance, green metals like green aluminium, green steel, green iron, that Australia may be able to export into the future, relying on clean, cheap energy as a consequence of having so much renewable resources here. So there's a lot of opportunity for Australia in the 21st century to draw on as we have a clean energy economy.
So those are the economic opportunities. What about the economic risks of not doing anything around climate change, given that the insured costs in Australia now, because of extreme weather events, are around the billions?
It's very worrying. And of course, just in 2025, we've seen very significant extreme weather events, from the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef to the algal bloom in South Australia, which has been devastating fisheries and tourism industry in that state, as well as the drought in southern Australia and great flooding events in northern New South Wales and southern Queensland. So just this year, we've seen continual extreme weather events that have had a real drag on the nation's economy. And what the risk assessment shows is that drag will become almost unmanageable by late this century if we don't act much more quickly. And of course, that's true for every country around the world, but Australia is particularly vulnerable in terms of compared to other developed nations. So it's certainly in our interest to protect our own economy and our people by tackling the climate crisis here and advocating abroad for greater action.